understandable, I think, to the lay public. So I'm going to suggest to the audience that we ask you questions in text. I'll collect them out of the chat, I'll repost them, and read them out loud. When you hear me read them out loud briefly, then you can answer them in voice, and that will give Lori Vaughn some children with disabilities. How should families that have children with disabilities, respond to the accusation that they are using an unfair amount of public resources?
Hi. That's interesting you bring that up, because what my data is actually showing is that families, yes, we might be using resources. It's actually a myth, because at least accessing services. Most families are not aware. They are not, they don't know. I mean, this, I could say, was more for families from low-income minority contexts. It breaks my heart that they're living in this large country where there is access, but just because of their inability to understand their system, they are not able to access it. That is one side of the story. Then when you also interview families who are more educated and who are at least, let's say, better placed in society, they seem to know how a whole chapter in a book where we talk about service systems. I don't think they're designed with families to be the center of the universe. It's more like the service system is the center of the universe, and everything else is revolving around that. And families are expected to learn to understand how the system works and get into it. I hope that somewhat gets to your question, Jen.
It does, and we have another question from Carla. She is a Belgian citizen and also a friend of two mothers with autistic children. There's an ever ongoing discussion if children with your study.
I must answer this question in two ways, on a personal level and from the study perspective. So first, I'll do it from a personal level. Well, let me do it from the study perspective first. Study perspective, remember, I interviewed low-income families. Many of our families who are represented in this data set were actually, I would say, ignorance is bliss. Before the study started, many of them did not know what was going on. They were just happy. Even though I collected cross-sectional data, many of our families were part of a family support program called that systems navigation. By the end of 6 to 8 months, we would sometimes, in about 10 of the families, we went back and reevaluated them because we didn't have enough money to reevaluate every family. Just as pilot data, we wanted to see if it made a difference. And we found that it did make a difference for the 10 families we reevaluated, that they were significantly, there was a significant difference in their ability to get services. So for this data, for this group that I interviewed, I would say that many of them, remember, if you recall my slide of the distribution of disability, 27% most families don't know what they're doing, or the schools don't know what they're doing. So families are at a loss, and these are low-income families who are forced or restricted to stay where they are. And hence, that's why we get the overrepresentation of autism there. And secondly, you also see that 25% of the families had an unspecified intellectual disability, which I believe that numbers will come down as families go for testing and they actually get a clearer diagnosis. Sometimes it's because the school gave them a label and the parents haven't followed up and found out. So coming back to that same question to my friend from Belgium is, yes, it's a tough inclusion. I guess it's a case-by-case basis. We can't make a blanket rule. I'm aware of various schools. My son is right now included, or he was a lot included when he was younger, but as his learning is not so beneficial in inclusive settings, or we're finding that behavioral problems increase a lot, and he's not learning as much. So for his sake, sometimes he does spend a lot of time one-on-one, which of course, we're fortunate to have a school system that is always reevaluating it almost on a yearly basis, or sometimes even a half-yearly basis, and he gets more time alone. And to from other school systems, where I've heard of a particular school system where it's a public charter school somewhere in California. I won't name names, but they claim that 90% of their children with autism go on to colleges. And so the model is that, when it's segregated, when they get more attention, the children are learning more at their own level rather than being forced to adapt to set ways of learning in public schools. That sort of gets to your question.
Okay, then I'm going to say that for those of us who listened to in our communities who have children with developmental disabilities, which is probably similar to that old definition of idiotic, has that improved sufficiently over the 1800s? So I want to thank Preeti very much for offering us another way to think about the communities that we are in and the other people who are in the communities with us. That's really important. And if we are done, if we have no more questions, I'd like to say that we have a break. Thank Preeti again. We're going to return at 5 p.m. SLT to learn about some useful strategies for well. Encourage everyone to share what they've learned or what they're thinking about or what questions they have.